because I asked this question, um, whether we can say of a given man that he is wholly God, which obviously sounds ridiculous, and I don't fully remember your response at this point, but the response sounds to me like it always has to be in the nature of a qualification. So this man is like God in some respect, we might say, which is interesting already, because where God is he who is essentially he who is infinite in every respect, to be infinite but in only some respect is just to, in the end, well, fail to be God. And so, which is, I mean, you can say that when it comes to God and man, God has attributes of immanence and transcendence, right? He's in everything and everyone, but he's also transcendent. And the question is, so I guess I should have backed up to here. The the um the degree to which this principle is properly axiomatic, or whether that should be debated. But, and again, I don't know if it's totally original to Chris Langan, but I learned it from him. The Sindifionesis principle that says every time you have a distinction, it's presupposing some deeper unity in virtue of which the distinction may be drawn. And he takes that as an analytic or logically necessary truth. And if that needs to be litigated, then I'm willing to get into that territory. I'm not sure I fully understand it either, but I think I understand why Langan says that, and I think I agree. But
say what he says one more time, please.
The principle he calls Sindifionesis is just saying that every time you are able to draw a distinction, that's presupposing some more fundamental unity or identity that exists at a more generic level of conceptual structure. And so if we take that on board, see, then it informs my response to the question of whether God's transcendence can ever be his final attribute, or put another way, whether distinction or division can be the ultimate reality. Because it seems to me that where we have man over here and God over there, whatever unity is presupposed by that is more fundamental than either, and also makes each one, God and man, a type of that unity, and equally a type thereof. And now I understand what it's possible to do is almost like rotate the diagram and say that, specificity on the one hand and genericity on the other, they're distinct. But what I keep returning to is this question of where non-duality is the ultimate reality. In a sense, that's a one-valued logic that only answers yes. And so it's like, from that perspective, the likeness, even between genericity and specificity, is always found. The answer to the question of same is always yes, because it's always recognizing the way that to even see the difference is positing a more fundamental unity. So to me, what it's leading to is it's a profoundly crazy and paradoxical idea that every reality is equally and in all respects God, that God is the only reality. And though we perceive difference, and though we perceive that, in this moment, I'm having a finite experience of these, finite and delimited identities, that in some crazy way, the true nature of my experience is somehow an unmediated experience of the infinite. Like, well, anyway, I think that's enough for a response, so that we can, go back and forth on.
So, two things. One, I think the reflexive nature of the ineffability of the tetragram really answers what you're talking about in terms of generality and specificity. It is a reflexive admission that I don't know. And yes, this is something that is beyond my knowledge. And second, I think the orientation which we have to have in the world, and why Jordan Peterson and this little corner came into being, is a refutation of what seems to be a postmodernist, subjectivist idea that everything is equally God, right? Sur merava asetov, flee from evil and do good. And that's why Sam Harris is like, well, I want to leave evil, right? Because you have to have an orientation in the world. And if you don't have an orientation of this is better than X is better than Y, that there is a good to which I am oriented and an evil I am oriented against, then you lose all life. And this is fundamental to the Jewish Hebrew sculpture of the Bible, right? I call upon the heavens and earth as witnesses to you today that I have set before you good and evil, life and death, and that I command you to choose life, right? And so this concept of everything being equally godly, right? Every man being equally godly.
Yes.
That's a complete failure of orientation towards the holy.
And that's good because what I'm saying, the way that I'm saying it should be outrageously controversial, and if it's not, then I'm not articulating it successfully. And B, there's a way that I want to defend it, which is like it's this episode from the Mahabharata, which is a Hindu epic that I grew up with some understanding of. And it's an interesting story. If I can just digress here briefly for my illustration to make sense. There is a figure in the Mahabharata named Krishna who, like Jesus, is, or at least the Catholic understanding thereof, is God incarnate, and the Mahabharata is about an intradynastic war. So you have two groups of cousins basically, and one of them is a little bit more God-fearing than the other, and they know that Krishna is God, and so the leader of each group of cousins, they race to Krishna's bed, and one of them goes to Krishna's head and the other one goes to his feet, and Krishna gives them the option: one of you can have me in your armies but in a non-fighting capacity, and the other of you can have my armies, because he's himself the head of some dynasty. And so the non-God-fearing cousins, the Kauravas, they choose to have the armies naturally, and then the God-fearing ones are like, we'll have you even in a non-fighting capacity. So anyway, the battle happens, and then the one who's called the grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, Bhishma, he's just out there on the battlefield. He's just messing stuff up really bad. And Krishna loses his temper. He gets angry, and he's like, you're going to cause my side to lose. So Krishna is one of the Pandavas, the good cousins. He's one of the Pandavas' chariot driver. And Bhishma shoots that chariot all up with his magical arrows, and it doesn't work anymore. So Krishna jumps out. He picks up a chariot wheel, and he's going to basically beat Bhishma down with it. And when Bhishma sees that, he drops his weapons and he smiles in anticipation, because he knows that as good an outcome as it might be to win on the battlefield, it is an even better outcome to die at the hands of God himself. And so there's a way that when I say this outrageous thing, when I defend it, I want to defend it in the manner of Bhishma dropping his weapons. I want to hear all the best objections against it, because now I'm hearing the importance of having some kind of identifiable moral good. You have to love good and hate evil. So there's a light and there's a darkness that you're eschewing in favor of the light. And I guess what I would say is, the first thing that I want to say is that when we say that all identities are one, or when we there's increasingly, it seems to me that to say that all identities are ultimately one is just what it means to say that God exists. So whenever I equate anyone with God, it's at that level where all things are equated with God. So in other words, in any given situation, let's say, it's not so much that any one item therein is God, but that the situation as a whole is God, and that the item therein is not understood ultimately apart from sort of the widest perspective one may take of its context. That perspective, which in some sense exhausts your consciousness, and so that when there is me in the act of making a judgment. Like, this seems like it's good, i.e., it seems like it's in the image of God, that ideal integration, both X and not X, in virtue of which all desirable things seem desirable to me. And if you want, I'll make a digression about that just to explain my sort of axiology here. But it seems to me that everything we consider good / desirable to the extent that it images the infinite. In that sense, it's an image of the invisible. It is good insofar as it represents the overcoming of some limit. And so whatever seems good to us, it's good because it's overcoming some limit. And that's also why whatever's good or attracts our eye is so often also novel. And whatever is not novel is not desirable and does not image the infinite. So there's me in the act of making that judgment, and increasingly it seems to me that's God in me recognizing God's self in that judgment. And so but the thing is, whenever this is the savage heretical implication of what I'm saying. The wicked man in choosing evil, that's God recognizing himself in that judgment. It's, in a sense, whatever a person purposes to do is their highest conception of the good. Otherwise, they wouldn't be choosing to do it. And that's a bit of decision theory or sort of axiology that, I'll explain it. But basically, the idea is, unless the reason why someone chooses one of two alternatives is that that's for them the greatest good, at least for them, that they can realize in that instance, we have no way of explaining why they choose one thing or another. And so basically, I think that's enough on the table for a response. Let me know if I need to sharpen it, but I'm acknowledging the severely insane and heretical nature of what I'm saying.
Okay. So I have to include a preface here, which is there are things in Judaism which we do not teach publicly. We teach. We did not teach publicly until 500 years ago at all. And it has become necessary to start teaching, despite the fact that we realize probably the majority of people who would hear it will misunderstand it. And if the majority of people who hear it will misunderstand it, then it's better not to talk about it at all, because you're only increasing confusion. Right? Cool. So I talk about the scriptures being arithmetic and Talmud being algebra and Kabbalistic concepts being calculus. And there are people who believe that once you learn calculus, it will tell you that 2 + 2 no longer equals 4. And I have to say 2 + 2 = 4. And anything that I am going to talk about in this vein is presented on the fundamental, the 2 + 2 = 4. And what is taught in Scripture is fundamentally true. And what we're trying to understand are things within the Scripture, not outside of the bounds of which Scripture teaches. 2 + 2 = 4. The 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments. And the simple understanding of the Bible is the simple understanding of the Bible. But for those who are asking a deeper question, like you are, one of the greatest theological discussions in the past 300 years of Judaism has been the understanding of Tzimtzum Kepshuto, which is Tzimtzum talks about the constriction of God that is necessary for the world to exist. And Hasidic philosophy versus what is now called Lithuanian philosophy was once called Mitnagdim or Misnagdim, which is the opponents of Hasidism, right? They were trying to understand how it can be that a God in a sense withdraws himself from the world in order for us to exist, in some way appearing as if we are not God. Because God, in his infinite, in being infinite, right, obliterates all things that is not God. And so the explanation which I espouse as somebody who is a student of the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who wrote Tanya, which anybody interested in these concepts, I mean, that's where we get into. I have a weekly series with Ben where we get into Tanya. And the analogy that's made is God as infinite light. And it just happens that this analogy works, and please don't take the analogy too far, but the Kabbalists talk about two types of light. They talk about the light Sovev Kol Almin, the light that goes through and is beyond all the worlds, and the light Memala Kol Almin, that which pervades and interacts with all the worlds. And the analogy can be made to a background radiation which is omnipresent, and it doesn't interact with the material at all, right? So it goes right through us, and it doesn't in any way affect us, and it's always there. And then there's the light, which is like visible light, which bounces off and shows and heats up, right? So that distinction, God is both Sovev Kol Almin and Memala Kol Almin. God fills all the worlds, and he also is beyond all the worlds. And so in those two aspects, I mean, these are contradictory things, but they are, God is both at the same time. And to the degree that we see a difference in the holiness of any object, right? So I would say a human being is obviously more in the image of God, reflects God more clearly than my dog does. And I think that's clear. That is from an aspect of Memala Almin. That is from an aspect in which God is revealing himself. And when God isn't revealing himself, then it isn't
hello? What? Oh, okay, lost him.
He's
hey.
going back to.
There he
is.
Back up slightly. We lost you.
Okay, I was talking about God being present in my dog and in me. And is God present in my dog? In a way, yes. Is he present in me? Yes. And in some ways, because a dog does not have the capacity to sin that a human being does, he's more present in my dog or in a rock than he is in me. Sorry, I'm getting water for my dog. Did
I think I
any of that
lost you
make
there.
any sense?
Yeah, it was making
It
sense.
does. I just have many responses. Was Chad coming in? Oh no, or is that me on an echo?
I don't know.
Or is that
Something.
Mike? Well, so
I don't know.
so when Hezi brought up the Simpson, I just again brought it back to the Syndipionis principle, which again maybe that's what we need to put under the microscope or question or litigate it. But if you have the notion of, and I understand the Simpson is a way into a paradoxical concept. I'm not like Cal destroys the Simpson with facts and logic right now. I like that idea a lot. So you have God withdrawing, so that there can be room for something other than God, so to speak. But then the Syndifionic question, if you like, is between underneath the place where God is not, so to speak, and the place where he is, so to speak. What's more fundamental, and so, or like what's underlying it in virtue, so that the distinction can be drawn. You mentioned the two kinds of light, and that to my mind it does map onto what I asked or observed earlier about which of God's attributes, his transcendence or his immanence, has greater fundamentality. While you were making your points, I wrote, in which mode is God, the ultimate reality, more ultimate or fundamental, i.e., in which mode is he more God? In which mode is he God as such? And it seems to me the immanent is, that in virtue of which the distinction is drawn is by its nature more fundamental, more ultimate, and more ultimately apposite to the nature of ultimate reality. Finally, the notion is, it seems problematic. I'm not just going to inherently swat it down, because again, I'm trying to defend myself in the manner of Bijma dropping his weapons. If I'm wrong, I want to be corrected. But it seems problematic to say that the infinite God can be less present in anything, which does again lead to this implication that is seemingly one would say non-Copernican, humanity no longer at the center of everything, but really more properly, it's to try to say that from the gaze of the infinite, everyone and everything is the center, and to say that the infinite is of such a nature that gaze is possible for him. So I'll let you respond to that.
Well,
you're on mute. I'm sorry.
So I'll say, we say that, in fact, the aspect of Sovev, that which transcends all world, is actually more fundamental.
Indeed.
Yeah,
that's what I suspected.
Right, and but the point of creation is that, in fact, we will eventually have, and I mean, this really gets into deep stuff that I've been talking with Ben about. So the Rebbe, the final leader of Chabad Hasidus, him, his first speech that he gave, his inaugural speech, which was basically the motto of his entire reign, 50-year reign as the leader of Chabad, and basically one of the greatest Hasidic leaders to ever live, was so in the Song of Songs, it says, "I have come into my garden." And he explains that is the fundamental reason for creation, is for God to come into his garden, to come into where he essentially always was, but a return to his garden. And this aspect of a the greatness of the light is from the darkness. A person who has never experienced darkness doesn't recognize the greatness of the light. It is, and the verse I believe is from Ecclesiastes. Ra'iti yitron ha'or min ha'choshech ki yitron ha'chokma min ha'sichlut ki yitron ha'or min ha'choshech. I saw that the greatness of wisdom over folly is as the greatness of light from the darkness. And the Hasidic understanding of that is that the greatness of the light comes from having experienced the darkness.
Right.
And so God withdraws,
Yes.
but that withdrawal is in a sense a lie, and is a veil which covers up the truth, which is he was never gone to begin with.
Right. So it's like what I said earlier, like an essential duality of duality and non-duality, or with Chokmah and Bina, being and becoming, right? So that, like, we start on a road of logic, and it's like the idea is that if identities are discriminable from each other, that has certain implications, or that in order for words to have meaning, they have to be sort of on their complement. The Sin Diffionesis principle of Chris Langan is basically saying that if X is defined on its complement, such that what X is upon investigation is not X, that implies that there's a union of X and not X that's underneath both, and that's for him is the analytic immediacy of the Sin Diffionesis principle. And so what it is suggesting is that the ultimate reality is unity, or that we are kind of aspiring to a condition in which words will no longer require a complement, or experiences will, in a sense, no longer require a contrastive condition in order to have meaning. This is a sort of a provisional starting place, which also, in a way that I find hard to articulate it, at least right now, it also does seem to require a certain, it does seem to have a certain necessity, like to your point. So this is kind of an interesting place to camp out.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you're reaching to a place of no man can see my face and live. Right? I've done this several times. There's an explanation of, there's a story in the Bible. Moses asks God he wants to see God's face, and God says, and this is right after where it says, I speak to Moses face to face.
Yes.
And God says, no man can see my face and live, but I will allow you to see me from behind. And it says God puts him into a rock and passes by him, and Moses sees God from the back, right? And the Midrash says, what did Moses see? He saw the back of God's phylacteries. What are phylacteries? They're these leather boxes with scripture in them that Jewish males wear, and it's actually mentioned in the Christian Bible. And one box is between your eyes, right on your forehead, and one box is on your arm. And so the Midrash is saying that Moses saw that tie which keeps the box of scripture between your eyes. Okay? Now, that that form of tying is something external to our understanding, right? Like, you don't understand scripture by tying it to your forehead, right? That is a very external way of seeing things, right? To physically tie a bit of scripture to your forehead, right? And that knot, right? That knot that, in a sense, keeps scripture tied to God's forehead, whatever that means, right? Is the only way in which we can see God.
But
yeah.
It seems to me that in light of that, and again, I mean, just taking the Sindifionis' principle for what it's worth, because you said earlier that the transcendence of God is his more ultimate attribute, and it's, in a way, it's like saying that distinction can be the ultimate reality. But in light of everything we just talked about, or again that Sindifionis' principle, it seems like the unity has to be the ultimate reality. And again, the name of the stream, the essence of reality, is unity. That's kind of the continual focus that I am. That's why I'm always that's why I'm always absorbed by this question of the sort of infinite indwelling of God in every person. Like in the scripture, I'm increasingly just coming to think that everything it says of Jesus Christ, it can say of each of us, that in each of us, the fullness of the Godhead dwells bodily.
But I think Chad actually makes the best point when he says, isn't that consummation coming into the garden?
Is it something that we should see as necessarily to be awaited, as opposed to an imminent and immediate reality? At least to the best of one's ability.
Ultimately, I have to go back to, you're getting married in 2 days and you have a baby, right? And it's nice to talk about the romantic theological idea of being that newlywed, right? The virginal bride and the virginal bridegroom. But ultimately, it has to be about having the babies.
Yeah, we have to have a
really good chance. Let me take a time out. I'll come right back.
Symbolism only for married people, where we can talk about.
And I have to say, Chad, like, your comment was right on point.
So,
yeah. Well, I thought you mean that, because that made me. I keep thinking of it as like, it's the story of Adam and Eve, and because the question is, you can always think of like you can have an infinite regression backwards of like causes, and at some point you ultimately do end up with like that agent arena distinction. Either you have a universe creating people in it, or you have a personal creator creating a universe or something. They say, who created that, and you kind of can go back, you keep going back. So at some point, like God, that's the difficult thing, is to figure out like what's the distinction between creator and creation, and if there is one. And I think about it. So like, here I am in my workshop, and I can create things in here or whatever, but it requires that I have that space to do it. It requires me to be in this area. There is another way that I can create without this space, which is in my imagination. But if I imagine something, it's imaginary or whatever, or we don't. It's not equal to the thing that's real. And the ultimate thing is when you imagine something first, and then it comes to fruition, and you really make the thing. And then, because then not only can you could always enjoy your imagination, you know, it's like I could write a book in my head. If I never write the book down and share it with anybody, it's just a book only I can enjoy. If I put it out, other people can enjoy it. And I think, you know, so that's kind of the question, because if everything is always, you know, the question is more or less, can God create something external to himself, I guess you could say. And you know, I think like that's what you see in the pattern of creation, where like, why doesn't he just make Eve out of the dirt like he made Adam out of the dirt? He makes Eve out of Adam, and then like Adam
together, right?
Well, then, yeah, I mean, then they're joined together. So then there is that consummation. And you think about it, it's like, and maybe this gets to Jacob's point, you know, like, what is, before Adam can have his wife, what does he have to do? He has to explore every other part of creation. He has to explore the garden and see all the other animals. And when he sees all the sum of all the other things, he sees similarities between all of them, but they're not quite the same. And in some way, he has an imagination. Okay, you know, because he sees all these animals, male and female, and he sees the trees, male and female, and he, you know, all the different things. You know, however much he explores, and then he can say, I'm like this thing in this way, but it's not equal to me, or whatever. And then ultimately, when you know, God puts him to sleep, creates him, he sees Eve. He knows that he is seeing himself in his corresponding form, because he's explored everything else there is. So I think, you know, and maybe this is even to say, like, idolatry, you know, we're so prone to it or whatever. And there is the thing of like, yeah, it's never God. It's like whatever we're saying is God, maybe like that's not God himself. But what are we like? Then if it's not God, what is it? If it's not the creator, then it must be part of creation. Like once all of creation is explored, then it's actually explored and known to be separate from God himself. Then that is a consummation. Then God has his bride, as we, you know, in the wedding imagery of like, you know, of Revelation and all this thing. So, you know,
You're trying to say that in that case, then God is wholly present in the identity under consideration.
I like, so I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean,
That's what I
guess,
would try to steer it toward. But
well, yeah. I mean, it's like, where was Eve before she was standing next to Adam? She was
In
like
his imagination.
with well, in a way, yeah. She was within
Yeah,
him,
that's
or
what I was
whatever.
gonna say.
Yeah, she was within him, and Adam was within the dirt, and the dirt was within the watery chaos, and that was, you know, in the mind of God. And so, I mean, I don't know, because I kind of see, like, in a sense, you know, because time is a created thing. At some point, like, God desired the you know, the ultimate eschatological vision, and it just came into being instantly, and we are just only able to experience it through the linear progression of time, which is kind of like why, like, if John sees a vision of the new heavens and the new earth, like, he's seeing a vision of something that already exists. It just doesn't exist from our perspective right now. But
Well, it's like what you said about your book, and now, you know, your book example is that, like, you can write an entire book inside of your head, but until you put pencil to paper, it's not going to be shared with anything. So Eve was always in God's head, you know, like Chad said, in his imagination, but she came into reality when she, you know, so she always existed. Like Christ said, I knit you together, you know, I think it says, or yeah, it says of God, like, I knit you together in your mother's womb, you know, and that we've always existed. It's just now we're getting drawn out, or we're getting written out, and we're experiencing that through time. I mean, so
Yeah.
my
Well,
book is
Are you guys
my
seeing
book
all
is our
this?
yes, we see it.
You see all of these turkey out there?
nice.
So
You
many
got
of
the
them.
turkeys.
There's like 10 of them out there, and then like 5 squirrels. There's over there to the left, there's a cardinal. This is crazy. That's
They-
insane. Anyways, this idea of the book, you write the book in your head, and then it's not it has no effect on the world unless you write it. I think that that's actually not true. I think once you invoke the imagination, it will immediately have an effect on the world. And that depends on whether you write it, or let's say if you're struggling with writing it down, that will play out in all sorts of ways in the world that are probably equal to more like uh, maybe not so good. Maybe so. I'm not sure, but I think that the
Yeah.
fundamental reality of or the reality is fundamentally imagination. And imagination is such a terrible word to describe this because we have such a bad relationship with imagination. Like we have become unenchanted even with or disenchanted with even imagination. So it's like, a mystery.
Oh no, it is a mystery. It was a mystery. Well, I always think it too is the thing about imagination, and like it does have an effect, but like like what can I say? The thing that I actually do is like the most centrally real. It doesn't mean the thing that I only imagine is not real in a way as well. Like, but then that's where you get into like distinction and stuff, because it's like, we can imagine the world where Eve didn't eat the fruit, or the world where Cain didn't kill Abel, and like God can imagine that too. And is that world real in some sense? Because it made me think of a sense. This is what I kind of shared this idea with Cal a long time ago, but like because one of the big draws toward like a universalist thing is, well, we don't want like the loved ones the people that I love, but if they reject God, if we say that's whatever, their choice puts them in heaven or hell. Well, maybe there's another reality where they made the right choice, and so they are there. When I get to heaven, they're all there, but they, their history or whatever is a life where they did things different than in the shared history that we had together. So
I kind of had a thought while you were talking. So we were talking. Let me see if I can retrace my thinking. So we were talking about being a thought of God, and how that like Eve was not in reality until He brought her in. But something that's not real that has an effect, and they're always laying in wait, is like spirits. So like I didn't actually go out and murder my brother, but I hated him in my heart. And so like that's going to have an effect on me, which is again, eventually if I feed it enough, it'll have an effect on the world. And so like and to Kale's point, like Kale was, I think what you're talking about, Kale, is that like how, like, is God tied to the lack of light in the same way? Is He as present in the darkness as He is in the light? Is that what you're kind of saying? In that like God, if God is everywhere, God is everything, then he's in he's in the unreal as He is in the real.
Well, that is, as far as the consideration of like reality and imagination, like act and potential, that's a different sort of discussion, because it's actually circling around many of the same things that, well, I mean, look, if someone were a smarter philosopher than I, and had better thought these things through, they would be able to show you the integration of what you just said right away. I mean, for me, if it like I can talk about when we talk, for me, like right now at my level of understanding, the discussion of the relationship between act and potency is going to circle around many of the things that Jacob and I were just talking about, but in a sort of different way. That's it's a discussion I want to say for another time, because I was about to ask Jacob, is the ability to end the stream in any way dependent on my being here, or you can end the stream when I'm gone?
I can end the stream.
Okay, beautiful. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna have to head out, and I'll listen to you guys on the stream as I'm doing my chores and such. But thank you very much for your time today, gentlemen. Thank you for always letting me on your channel, Jacob. And thank you, Josh and Michael, for joining and for humoring me as I was so doggedly perseverating on my fixations. All right, so thank you.
Congratulations on the wedding. Give our best
Yes,
to your
congrats.
wife.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much.
And then you can come for the married only symbolism stream that we'll have
Oh, okay.
later.
Yeah,
All right.
that we'll have on Jacob's channel, and Jacob won't be able to join.
No, we could just have it on my channel and 6 people will see it.
Okay.
That
Or
sounds.
whatever.
I don't know what to think about that. It almost sounds like a Russell style paradox, like you're the barber who shaves all the barbers who can't shave themselves or don't. So anyway, but all right, I'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Hey.
funny. I'm teaching a parenting class, and it's like my friends were making fun of me for that.
Hey, I wanted to. I had been listening to Kale there for a long time, and you and him go back and forth. And I was trying to follow as best as my understanding would allow. But at some point during the conversation, I thought that I had a comment, but it kind of, the conversation moved on. But is the allegory of the cave at all, or Plato's allegory of the cave at all, applicable to what he was talking about, in that, meaning that there's a false light inside the cave? Is that at all related to the true light that the man finds when he goes outside of the cave? Was that kind of what he was talking about, as far as like God is present in in some of the false light as much as in the true light? Is that what he was trying to say?
There is. I think there definitely is some of that there. I'm
Okay.
very, very hesitant, like when we talk about this, not to constantly say, what we're not saying is that good and evil are the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. No,
Right.
and that yeah, because as far as I understand it, that would be like a bad thought that God wants, that he wants out of his head. He's going to expel it. He's going to burn. He's going to. It is like, because it's not like as if God can't conceive of evil. It's that he refuses. He in no way can be present inside of it. But it's not that as if like there's no ability to conceive of it. It's because if he wasn't able to conceive of it, he wouldn't know what it was, and that's not God. And so, like, I mean, he doesn't. He's in no way participatory or in no way present there. So, like, you're right that we could never say that good and evil are the same thing. But I don't know. In my mind, it would seem like if we're using the thought that we're all thoughts inside of God's head until we come into reality, and then we're like a book being written, that possibly has already been written, and we're just reading along with it as the observer or something like that. That evil is unacceptable thought that God wants expelled from his reality.
Well, okay, I'm going to have to disagree with that. So you are going according to what I would say is the Greek and possibly how most Christians understand evil, which is an absence of God, which I would say is refuted by the Bible explicitly.
Where at would you say? Just so I know.
God says, "I am the Lord; I create evil." Isaiah 45:7. Here, I'll pull it up.
Yeah. Because this is helpful to me in some of my ponderings as well.
So Isaiah 45 is actually very fundamental to Jewish theology, the entire thing. But so 45, 5. I am the Lord, and there is no other beside me. There is no God. I will gird you, and you, though you have not known me, so that you will know that from the rising of the sun to its setting, there is nothing other than me. I am the Lord. There is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and I create. And this word here is the exact same word as in the they translate it as calamity, and all the Christian translations try to twist it to their theology, but the word there is precisely the same word as the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, or bad, or however you want to put it. This is that word. I am the Lord who makes all of these things. And so it's not so. The Jewish understanding is Kol Rahmana Avid L'Tav Avid. Everything that the Merciful has created, He has created for the good. That does not mean everything is good. And the example I like to give is children's hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
What do you call a place where you take a little child to strap them down, make them bleed, make them cry, cut into them, poison their body, make their hair fall out, right? You call it a children's hospital. And so I hate children's hospitals. Children's hospitals are evil and bad things that should never exist. Except I also give money to children's hospitals, because children's hospitals are beautiful things that God has created and allow us to keep little children alive, right? And just as when, as a father, you may hold your child while a doctor sticks a needle into your child,
I had
right?
that experience yesterday. My daughter's getting her immunization.
You do it, right? And this pains you greatly,
Yep.
right? But you still do it. That is how I would say is a Jewish view of evil, is that
So is evil a tool of God?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was. So he reaches into the darkness with tools. I mean, is that a okay way to say that?
He creates the darkness as a tool.
Yeah, and so the darkness that's present in our lives will drive us towards his light.
Correct.
So the false light drives us towards the real light. In the cave analogy of it, and that so we I need to think over that for a second. Michael, you were going to say something.
Well, it's like, so I think, so I'm in this shop here, and literally everything that I use when I make anything, every one of these is a blade or a pokey thing or a smashy thing. Yep. That is all just designed to destroy the fibers of the wood.
The pieces of the thing you don't want. Because the table is in the wood, you just haven't constructed it yet.
Right. And so like there's always a cost to creation. And I think maybe this is the thing, where like when Christians say like, creation ex nihilo, like out of nothing, that's like, okay, but then what is nothing? It's the no thing. What else is the no thing? God is no thing. So it's still coming out of God. So creation has to have some kind of a destructive, that's the only way you make anything. And I think that when is Josh not here? I don't know. Well,
He's probably listening. I turn off
Okay.
my camera when I have to go like zap my oatmeal
yeah.
because I'm really hungry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, that's when David says in Psalm 51, against you and you only have I sinned. Like, I think that he's understanding that, like, yes, he sinned against Bathsheba and he sinned against Uriah, but ultimately God is the one who bears all the cost of those sins because he created us and, we're his children. And, because, like, if my children hurt each other, that does hurt me, like, and I don't enjoy having to discipline them to teach them not to do that. And, I come to the point of thinking, like, okay, so if you were just to have the world be a simulation and you simulate all the possible worlds, and this is what I think, like, what's the philosopher Leibniz that said, like, this is the best of all possible worlds. I think it might actually be the worst of all possible worlds. Or I think if God imagined all the possible worlds, like, whatever, he could have made people more obedient and there would have been less pain or whatever, but that's not what he chose. He made this world with difficult people. And if you looked at the whole thing from creation to the end of time, and you took the one person who had the most difficult life and the most suffering unjustly, and then God says, I'll take that person's spot. And then in comparison, that person can forgive the other people for the wrongs done. If that person can forgive the wrongs done against him, then ultimately everybody could be forgiven, because
Yeah, you're getting into things I'm just gonna disagree with.
well, you can just disagree with him. But I mean, I would say, like, in a like,
God is not contingent. The world God created is the best possible world and the worst possible world, because God, that is all God can do, right? God is ultimately good. He does things in the best way possible, in a way that is hard for us to comprehend and acknowledge. And at some point, you have to go back to the book of Job and hear God say, I mean, to be vulgar, who the F are you? Which is basically what he says to Job.
yeah,
Right.
I think he says this in light of the one who ultimately suffers more than Job. So
Why? What does that have to do with anything?
because you can't, well, because it's like the Peterson thing of, if you can't imagine yourself, like, if you can't imagine yourself being the Nazi guard, you're going to be the Nazi guard.
What did God experience in the incarnation that he did not know before?
Nothing. But
Exactly. So
but
what's
it was
the point of it?
the necessary condition of creation being real and not just
No.
imaginary.
No, because God is the real realness. God
Oh.
cannot be God. Even if Tolkien wrote himself into the Lord of the Rings, he would never be contained in the Lord of the Rings. And to pretend that Tolkien writing himself into the, like, Brothers Karamazov, right? Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote himself into that book in many, many ways over and over again, including the fact that all of the kids, like the father of all the kids, is Fyodor Fyodorovich, and all of the kids are, whatever Fyodorovich, right? So he wrote that book is an autobiography in many, many ways, but ultimately you cannot point to the Brothers Karamazov and say that that is God, that is Dostoevsky, right? And in a similar way, but even infinitely more so, right? God experiences every single human life because he is the creator, he is the knowledge, he is that which makes every human life exist. And first of all, to say that God existed somehow more in Jesus than anybody else, I think is just patently false. But Jesus just isn't all that. And like the attempt for Christians to make him all that, like he was never a father. He was never a husband. He was never like, there are so many things that he wasn't. So that whenever Pajot says Jesus' story is the best story, I have to say, well, first of all, then why is it told 4 different times in 4 different ways? And why the rest of the Bible? Why everybody else in the Bible? If it's all about Jesus and nothing else, then it's, I mean, the focus on Jesus is clearly idolatrous.
Well, it's not only about Jesus. This is what I would say is that, okay, is this the ultimate reality that we live in right now?
Not at all.
Okay, so what we are living in is a prototypical reality, some sort of foreshadowing of reality to come. Like, I mean, this is my way of conceiving of it because, because like I said, anything I make, I can't just make things. Like the imagination part has to happen as well. I have to think of the thing before I can make it. And so in a sense, and when I go through the process of making things, I think about what if this goes wrong, or what if that goes wrong, or what if I do these different things, and I imagine all the possibilities I can think of, but the only one that gets created is the ones that fulfills the ultimate purpose that I want. So what happens to all those other things? They just don't exist or whatever. So, I mean, Jesus, it's not just about like the finished work, the atoning thing, because, God has this arenic quality. The universe is in God. Everything is in him. He created it. He didn't appear in a space and then create a world next to him in that space. There was no space. There was just him. So everything that's good that God wants in what I would say the ultimate creation, the new heavens and the new earth, the thing that he ultimately desired to create, is in Christ. That's what it says. And we are in Christ. It's like the ark. All the good parts of the world that Noah lived in made its way into the ark, and then it was closed up, and then God destroyed all the stuff he didn't want, and then what emerged.
This is the good stuff. This is all the good stuff. This is none of the good stuff. This is the bad stuff. This is the bad stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the flood. What comes out of the flood? What comes? Well, yeah. So he did. That's what happened.
Is it?
His flesh perished, and he rose again. So
he did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't see it.
Okay, that's fine. I know. I mean,
but no, Michael, it's not fine because you were just talking about the importance of the actual real, right?
It's fine because I haven't learned Hebrew yet. You have your excuse as long as I don't learn Hebrew. That's your excuse.
It's not a matter of excuse, Michael.
No,
where's Jesus? If he's really resurrected, where is he? He
is in our hearts, in my heart.
Yeah,
I've experienced him. Okay, so
the ascension nullifies the incarnation.
No, it doesn't. First of all, I don't necessarily think that he is not in bodily form all over the place doing all sorts of things, because there's one I read the other day of Jesus appearing to a guy, a Muslim guy, a Hezbollah jihadi guy in a prison, standing before him,
Yeah.
and he says, "I'm Jesus Christ," and the guy becomes a Christian.
Well,
prison
I'm glad he had a
And
move
he was
up.
in Iran,
Yeah.
spouting words to some guy,
Yeah.
who's writing them down, and he says, "What is this book? A man in white gave it to me," and then he brings it to somebody that can read it and says, "That's the Book of John."
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Jesus is all over the place doing all sorts of things. I mean, the world is combinatorially explosive, but if I want to spend 18 hours a day just listening to testimonies of things that Jesus is doing, I can do that. So
You could, yeah, but that would be idolatry and it would destroy the world.
I just listen to it some, and then it encourages me to go and share those things with other people.
Look, I am very, very happy that Jesus inspires people to move from Hezbollah to not being Hezbollah, or you from like your normal idolatry to being less idolatry. And that's, when David Brooke became a Christian, I was sure that was him moving towards godliness as opposed to what he was before. But ultimately, if we're looking towards the ultimate end, in that ultimate end, this falls away. The crucifixion falls away because that is death.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on one hand, I don't know. I mean, is creation's eternally existent on God's decision to keep it existing, and in one sense, I think Jesus is always there on the cross, but he is also resurrected, and he's walking among us, and one day we see him face to face.
I go back to I think Christianity is viewing the light through a glass darkly. And I think eventually Christians will actually know as they are known. But like ultimately that's I see, and I mean it goes back to the thing we constantly end up back at. Like, if I really saw that people who were truly committed to the Torah actually came to believe Jesus is the Messiah through their involvement in the Torah, right? Like what it says in John, right? If you believe in Moses, you would believe in me, right? That I've never seen that be true. I have never once, and I went searching, seeing that to be true. I have seen many cases where through the development of their Christianity, Christians have become Orthodox Jews. And that's the type of testimony that shows me a progression, right? I'll give you that Christianity is a step up from belonging to Hezbollah. Yeah. But the question becomes, is Christianity the fulfillment of Judaism, or is Judaism the fulfillment of Christianity? And I think all the evidence points to, and each person has to look at the evidence for themselves. But for me, the evidence is quite clearly that Judaism is the fulfillment of Christianity, not the other way around.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think it must be one or the other. I think because I'm not. I don't hold to the replacement theology. I think that is destructive, and I don't, and that's why I don't have this. I do have to say, like, I think as long as I don't know Hebrew, and you say that I cannot understand your point of view until I do, then you do have an.
Hold on, I've never said that.
Okay.
I've never said. Look, I don't think God does not reveal himself to people who can't learn Hebrew. I think that a refusal for somebody who can learn Hebrew, and it's perfectly understandable if you can't. You try to know God as best you can. But I think it is a deliberate refusal of Christians to learn Hebrew, because the only way you can maintain the scriptural mistakes of Christianity is by not knowing your Hebrew, because you have to have that type of distortion that translation allows.
Well, but everybody that's translating the Bible knows Hebrew, and there are many Christian missionaries. Like that's the.
But you choose, but like they pull translators off the translation committees because these people don't agree with your Christian values. That's part of how a translator is chosen to translate the Bible, is whether or not that person believes in Christianity.
Yeah, but it's not the propositional belief. It's the being a Christian. So that's the difference. Like, because there's lots of people that can say the right things to be a pastor, and occasionally they get in charge of places and it doesn't turn out well. But those who have a good ministry is because they actually believe it. It's a spiritual reality to them. So if somebody, if somebody doesn't believe that, it's not just about saying that they have the beliefs that are orthodox. It's about actually believing it. Not just on the propositional level, I guess you could say.
But the fact, it comes down to, I actually think this is part of what's led to the problems we have with academia these days, is people who don't live according to their beliefs, right? There's a joke that gets told in Orthodox Jewish circles a lot, which is this professor of ethics at a university gets caught doing disgusting things. You can say whatever the disgusting things are, and they say to him, "You're a professor of ethics. How come you don't live according to ethical standards?" And his response is, "If I were a mathematician, would you expect me to be a triangle?" Right? So there is a sense in which sometimes, like, I teach parenting classes. I've never actually been a parent, right? And I have to say, despite never having been a parent, I would be a much better parent, and I understand parenting a lot better than the people I teach parenting courses to, right? But ultimately, I think the reason Christians have, for thousands, like, it's one thing to translate the Bible to a different language, and because you're bringing it to them, it's a completely different thing to sit there studying, like, KJV only people, right? They're like, okay, why are you not teaching your kids Hebrew? Why are children who can easily learn, right? If you're spending all this time trying to educate your children in the Bible, why aren't you actually spending the time to learn one of the easiest languages that it's possible to learn, Like, Hebrew is infinitely easier than German or even Spanish or French, right? So why is it that Christian society has eschewed Hebrew for so long? And I mean, Jason says, Jacob, you're being too generous. You can't even maintain it with the English translation. I have to say, part of that is now that we can compare translations, and at the very least, like, now pretty much every Christian has heard the Jewish argument why in Isaiah 7 it doesn't actually say virgin, it says young woman, right? But 50 years ago that wasn't the case. And Christianity is just going to have to update itself with an actual knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures. And I have to get back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you don't believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls are a revelation from God, an absolute miracle, I don't know what counts as a miracle in the world, right? Like, what God had, like, I guess you could believe in some naturalistic way that it just happens to be that the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved for thousands of years without anybody finding them. But, I mean, come on. Like, that's as miraculous as anything that's happened in my life. And what the Dead Sea Scrolls have done more than anything is validate the Masoretic text. Like, even 20, 30 years ago, and even recently, I mean, I've had people tell me the Masoretic text is 1,000 years old and the Septuagint is 2,500 years old.
I don't have any. I have no opposition to learning Hebrew, and it's something I would gladly do when I have more time
I'm
to
more
focus on
concerned about
it.
your daughters learning Hebrew than you learning Hebrew.
Well, yeah, I will. Well, yeah, fine. I'll do. We'll do the Aleph with Beth together once. I'm waiting until my daughter learns how to fully read English,
Okay.
and then
you
before introducing new letters and characters and stuff. So
Okay.
she's getting close. But
How old is she?
5.
Okay.
It's not like, honestly, I don't have the rigid faith like the KJV only people that hangs on such a tight string of propositions that if one falls out of place, the whole thing crumbles. I'm basically living under the assumption that I must be 99% wrong about almost everything. But I know that the reason why my father's a changed person, not on drugs, not afflicted by demons, is because of Jesus and because of Christians who profess Jesus. I know the reason why my mom and my dad met each other and got married is because of Jesus. I know the reason why my relationship with my parents is better than it's ever been is because of Jesus. I know Jesus is the reason why I am married to the woman that I'm married to, which means part of why my children have Jewish heritage. And obviously getting to know you and the other people has been a good thing for me because, I can see, I don't have the view that I probably had when I was a lot younger, the way a lot of Christians do talk about, like, the Jews as it's presented in the New Testament. I mean, I have my suspicions that they might have been in a rough time. I think that Jesus, whether he is explicitly mentioned, I'm thinking some of those Pharisees probably gave a good long thought about some of the stuff he said, even if they didn't want to give him the credit for whatever decisions they came up with on some things. I think that he had an impact, even if it was not necessarily that that all the Jews became Christians right away. Like, I think God has a longer term plan than that. And if the Christian problem is that they're wrong in some sense about the nature of the incarnation, it doesn't really. It probably doesn't matter now. Like, because if Jesus was just a prophet who died horribly, it's still the reason why people that are not Jews are no longer pagans. So, I mean, I personally, I think when it comes to text criticism and all that stuff, all the best evidence that props up the Hebrew scriptures is even more so supporting the validity of the New Testament. So if you want to, you can't have one without harming the other. If you really want to defend the Hebrew scriptures and their claims as best you can, you probably should take some of the evangelical scholarship seriously that also supports the New Testament. So, but I don't know.
I'm not sure what type of bombs Jason thinks you're dropping. I mean, I am perfectly in agreement that Christianity has helped prepare the world for something better. I think that the advent of Christianity, but I mean, I'm not saying anything that's new or controversial except to Christians. Like when Maimonides wrote precisely that in his Mishneh Torah, the Christians were the ones who censored it. And it was censored for hundreds of years because Christians were offended that Maimonides said Christianity exists to prepare the world to better understand the Old Testament, right? To understand Judaism and the truth of Judaism. And I mean, going way back to somebody, who was it who asked, do Jews, it was Ben Franklin. He said, do Jews want to be understood? They're not proselytizing religion. And it's like, yeah, we want to be understood, but we don't believe that it's our place to make God's understanding understood, right? This is what God makes happen in the world. And ultimately, I think that is what God is making happen in the world. Without that's how I understand Isaiah 53. He opened not his mouth as a sheep to the slaughter, right? He went silently, and it says over and over, he went silently. And that's what we as Jews are commanded to do. Is I think we've taken it way too far in that when people ask us, we and I did it myself, I would avoid the discussion because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. And maybe I should continue to avoid the discussion because lots of people think I'm causing anti-Semitism, and maybe I am with the things that I say. But is it a matter of not wanting to be understood? Or I want to be understood. I don't know that I have the capacity to make myself understood. And I'm not, and like you said, it's not like I'm positive that I myself understand, right? When I describe things, when I explain things, this is just my best understanding right now. I'm causing anti-Jacobism. One thing Luke said, language, period, and translations are not one-to-one correspondence. There are many many correspondence, watch Ted's poetry lecture. Yeah, but the thing is, the Bible is poetry. And when you pretend to translate poetry, you're just, I mean, there's just no way. It's futile. That doesn't mean I don't want people to be exposed to the beauty of the Bible if they can't understand the Hebrew. But I will say that I have never once met a single Jew who knows Hebrew who believes that, who has said, "Oh, I don't believe in Genesis. Like, I don't believe in the Genesis view of creation because I believe in evolution, and therefore I don't believe in Judaism, because Genesis 1 is one of the most obviously poetic texts in the entirety of the Bible. Like, it is so poetic. Like, there are letters. There's only 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. There are letters that only show up like a few times in the entire chapter because it is so poetic. So yeah. Sorry, but this is a mistranslation. Uval Etzion Goel Mishaveh Pesha B'Yaakov does not translate, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. That's actually definitely not it. You want to show this?
Yeah, just this video here, I just put the link in the thing. Oh, I guess I didn't put it in the comments. I just put it in the private chat, so we'll paste it there.
I can. Yeah, you can just play it.
Well, I'm not gonna play the whole thing. It's like it's a whole interview, but it's cool. So this guy,
it's an hour long.
Yeah, he works for Logos Bible Software, but the guy he's interviewing is a Bible translator to some country, and he shares his website where you can look. It's just really cool because you can type in any verse, and if there was any interesting thing that they had to, like, if there was no obvious word or whatever in a particular language, and they had to make some kind of adaptation or whatever to translate the Bible from Hebrew into whatever language they're translating it into, it gives you like the back translation back into English of what they did. So it's just interesting stuff, like how some of those South American language, when they talk about the serpent in the garden, like they couldn't use the word, like the regular word for a snake, because it had some specific meaning in that language, and they couldn't use, like, the other choice was like a crocodile, but that wasn't what it was. But then they had this like mythological name for some like snake god kind of a thing, and they use that word instead. So it's just an interesting thing, like, you know, in that sense, the translation to that language makes the significance of the snake in the garden more readily apparent than in English or whatever. So, but it's a cool website. You can play around with it. So, I guess I could just get the link for the website out of the description too.
I'm glad Christians are playing with so much of like the various translations, and like that's what my channel started out being, was was actually showing people how to use the various websites to try to get better at the Hebrew. That's what my channel started as. Again, I don't think it's impossible for someone to use a translation to get to know God better. I do think that it is. Yeah, that's not going to show up on. So put it in the private chat, so I'll put it on the thing.
Yeah.
But I'll put it on my channel. The what you call it, but yeah, my brain is starting to fry. But I do think there's something important about the Hebrew, and I do think ultimately learning Hebrew does help you. Now, you mentioned Aleph with Beth, and so Andrew, who is Beth's husband, is he actually works on Bible translations, and he so part of the reason they made the Aleph with Beth channel was to help because what usually the way Bible translations are done is they're translated from English to the whatever language they haven't been translated to, and then they're translated back into English, and the Bible scholars like Andrew, who know the Hebrew, will try to catch any of the problems. And Andrew kind of thought that this was adding an unnecessary extra step, or at the very least, teaching Bible translators some Hebrew would help them more directly relate to the text. So that's actually how their channel started, was teaching Hebrew to Bible translators. And look, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that Christian translations are getting better. I think it's wonderful that we're spending more time looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text. And frankly, I was really surprised when we started doing the Greek Bible study to see some of the things I did see in the Septuagint. My Greek is horrible. Like, I can't read Greek at all. But like, while we were doing that, it was actually interesting. So Psalm 22 in the Septuagint, it starts out by saying, is far away from my unintentional sins, right? My salvation is far away from my unintentional sins. And when you know Hebrew, you see clearly how that's a mistranslation, right? The word there in the Hebrew is shagati, and the person understood it as shagagati, right? Which, it's very close, and shagagati is much more of a common word. And now you're talking my language. Now you're talking my language. Zephaniah 3:9. But yeah. Look, I do think Zephaniah 3:9 is ultimately where it's at. That the people will turn to a pure language so that we may all serve God together. And I think turning towards Hebrew is, and a Hebraic understanding of the Gospels is the way forward.
It's just funny because the Greek Orthodox will say that it's Greek, and the Ethiopian Church says that it's Ge'ez, and I'm sure. Well, obviously, the Muslims say it's Arabic, but I don't know if the Arab Christians say the same thing, or Syriac or whatever.
Father Stephen DeYoung comes from the Antiochian Church, which is the Arabic Church, and he says it's Hebrew.
Well, I mean, I think that, and this is the thing that to me made me not have to think about, like, because I'm a creationist, but I don't have to like take everything in the first 11 chapters of Genesis as like that we understand it so well, because if we think, I think it seems pretty clear that we assume that text was not just something Moses said for the first time on Mount Sinai, but that was preserved through Abraham. Then some of those accounts must have been spoken in a language prior to the Tower of Babel, and we have the Hebrew record of it, and I think that whatever that language was, the Babel language, was probably much more powerful at communicating ideas than any of the languages we have now. A more poetic language, probably a language that is, based in song, even a sung language, something like that. So, but I think
materialistically, if I were just going by normal historical standards, I would agree with you. I have a faith that Hebrew is the original language, and
yeah,
it is faith. It is something I believe merely because this is my religion.
It may have been, well, or it's because I'm not the Hebrew expert, but the way it talks about the languages being divided, or it's like whatever they had a great language that everybody spoke, and then everybody ended up with partial languages or something. They had to kind of figure it out from there. The way that linguists say a language has evolved over time or whatever. So it may have been the more complete version of Hebrew, but who knows? But it's interesting just because like you can pack so much more information into a language than the languages that we typically all speak.
So it goes back to a lot of what Luke is constantly talking about, which is like the more primitive and vague a language is, the more poetic and universal. And Greek is a much more exact language than Hebrew. And to some extent, I think, this isn't anything we're going to actually solve today. I am going to give you final words because I actually have to go work and stuff. Before I do, behind you, is that 4 of the exact same tool, or are those different tools?
They're all slightly different sizes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it just looks like
plans.
you have 4 exactly of the exact same tool, and I don't understand why you would need 4 of that one tool.
Well, those are all vintage, and I bought them at yard sales, and they'll fix them up and stuff. So they're all, most of those are all okay. That one is big. That one is big. That one is a little smaller, and that one's really small, or the other way around. And then I have a really big one up there that you can only see the bottom of.
What are they called?
Hand planes.
Ant planes?
Hand plane.
Hand
plane.
planes. Okay.
Yeah. Or a
and
plane.
What do they do?
They make things flat or smooth.
Okay. And so you would have a larger or smaller one depending on how strong you are and how big the surface you're trying to make smooth.
Yeah, the big one. So the big one up top, that one is for making making the edge of a long board straight. The smaller ones are more used for smoothing out an uneven surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
Anything you want to say before I end the stream?
Well, no.
Okay.
People should go look at the stuff that I don't post that often on my channel. And
Yeah,
I exist.
Michael does in fact exist. Michael does in fact exist, and it's good that Michael exists. I will end this stream.